It's our pleasure to welcome an author and graphic novelist who's been feeding the imagination of fantasy lovers for years. His works include the popular Sandman fantasy series, as well as the adult novel American Gods, and even children's books such as Coraline and The Graveyard Book. Neil Gaiman is in Indianapolis to present the 2010 McFadden Memorial Lecture for the library. And Neil, it's a pleasure to have you on Between the Lines. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. It's an honor to be here.
Have you ever been to our fair city before?
Have I been to Indianapolis? Yes, I must have been.
In your many travels.
In my many travels. But it's one of those things where I've zoomed through signed books and shot away. So this is the first time I've ever actually come to rest.
Well, we're happy you're here. Yeah. Now, you live near Minneapolis, Minnesota, correct? But you were born in England. When did you make residence here in the States?
1992, summer of 92, I came over here.
Okay. You began writing or discovered your love for writing at a very early age. I understand that you started writing stories with recurring characters actually at the age of 8. So was there ever a doubt that you were destined to be a writer?
Oh, I think in my head, I knew that I was going to be a writer because there was nothing else I wanted to be and nothing else I was any good at. As far as the rest of the world was concerned, this was a very strange kind of thing. My father confessed to me a few years ago before he died that he was actually fairly convinced that he would be financially supporting me for the rest of my life until I got a real job. And was sort of rather taken aback and pleasantly surprised to discover that no, I was doing just fine, thank you.
And yes, I'd say things have worked out quite well for you. Now let's talk about the Sandman series, which I believe began in 1988?
Yep,
somewhere
September 88.
In that era. What has made that series so intriguing for its readers?
I don't know, because I never got to be one of the readers. You know, it's one of the strangest and most peculiar thing about Sandman, which was a series that I did for DC Comics that lasted 75 issues.
Wow.
It ended at the point where the story was told. It remains and has remained in print, either in 10 paperback volumes or these days in 4 huge hardback volumes ever since.
Wow.
But I never got to be a reader of Sandman.
Yeah, and you never really analyzed why it became so successful.
I know what I was trying to do. What I was trying to do was write the kind of book that I wanted to read. I was trying to write the kind of book that when I started it, I was 26. The idea was, when I began, I thought, right, I'm 26, I want to write the kind of comic that would get me to go down to a comic store once a month and pay my $2 to find out what happens next. And that was my sole agenda.
Interesting. Now, the 19th installment of that won the World Fantasy Award for short story. How many installments of Sandman have there been?
There were 75 altogether, plus a special.
Okay.
So there was 76.
What about the graphic novel genre in general? Why has that surged in popularity in your mind?
I think it surged in popularity for several reasons, but one of the most obvious is because the quality was there. One of which was that it was always a place where storytelling was paramount. And I think storytelling toward in the sort of the second half of the 20th century, storytelling, just that sheer wonderful mechanism of what happens next. So then what happened? Fell by the wayside. Beautiful prose gained ascendancy. The idea of perfect epiphanies, the idea of literary structures that were games, I think all of that stuff, you know, the structures of modernism and then postmodernism, which in their own way were all anti-story, gained ascendancy, and I think people, in truth, missed story. So one of the things that fascinates me about and we're only 10 years into the 21st century, but story seems to have an ascendancy now that it really hasn't had since about the 1930s. You look at the wave of children's books that have happened since Harry Potter. all of which are story-driven.
Yeah.
You look at the way that writers like Michael Chabon have come to the fore as Pulitzer Prize-winning authors. And again, it's that thing of what happens? What happens next? The joy of turning the page. And I think graphic novels, led by people, you've got some fabulous writers. You have people like Alan Moore. You have, the powerful work of Frank Miller. You have Art Spiegelman doing Mouse. You have the brothers Hernandez. You have Eddie Campbell. You have this great number of amazing creators doing interesting work. Mm-hmm. But I think what drove the Renaissance was the discovery that this is a wonderful place for story.
Well, that's quite fascinating. But in our short amount of time we have remaining, I would like to talk to you about the versatility that you exhibit in your various writings, from fantasy and graphic novelist to adult novelist to even books for children. How have you been able to accomplish that? Obviously, you've not felt restricted to appealing to just one audience.
No, I mean, in some ways, I'm very willing to piss off people who love one thing I do by then going off and doing something else, and then going off and then pissing off those people by doing the next thing. And I think there's very much a feeling for me always that I'm like a kid who's been locked into a candy store overnight, and there are just so many bottles and jars that I can get into before somebody comes and unlocks it at dawn. And I want to try and get my hand into all of the jars. So I definitely want to do comics, and I want to do films, and I want to do TV, and I want to do children's books, and of course I want to do adult books and picture books. And right now I would love to do some theater. I'd love to write a circus. There's things I haven't done yet.
A writer is a writer is a writer, right? Because, I mean, you've gotten involved now in television writing. You mentioned the theater you've dabbed in. Is any one of these activities proven to be more satisfying than the other, or do you like to do it all?
I love being able to do it all. Mm-hmm. I meet people who are novelists, or short story writers, or screenwriters, or whatever. And they are marvelous people, and they tend to have a different approach to their craft to the one I have. And from my perspective, I want to make shit up. That's the best thing. I get to make cool stuff up.